What we're going to do today is we're going to be multiplying rationals part 2. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on the excluded value. So we've been simplifying them, and now we're going to add the excluded value to that. When we're looking at this, the first thing that we want to do is we want to see what we can factor. If we're looking at the top part, this one right here cannot be factored, so we just keep it as x plus 3. Now, if we look at our denominator, what we see is that they both have an x in common. So we're going to use the GCF. So we factor out an x, and then what we have is an x minus 3. Now, looking at the other fraction right here, we actually see two different things. First thing that we see is that they have an x in common. Then, after we factor out an x, we have an x squared minus 9. That right there is our special factoring pattern. So what we have for that second fraction is an x from here. And then when we take the square root, we get x minus 3 and x plus 3. Now, looking at our denominator, what we notice is that it's a trinomial. If it's a trinomial, then that means that we're going to be using the x. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply together, give us negative 12, add up to negative 1. That would be negative 4 and 3. So what we have is x minus 4, x plus 3. Now, that right there is the difficult part. Now for the easy part, what we're going to do is we're going to cancel. So we're going to look to see which ones can we cancel. We see the x minus 3's cancel. We see the x plus 3's can cancel. And we see that the x's can cancel. So what we're left with is x plus 3 and x minus 4. Now that right there is our first answer. That's the simplifying part. Now what we're going to do is we're going to state the excluded values. Excluded values, if you remember from a little while ago, that's what makes the denominator 0. So what we're doing is we're looking for all the values that x can't be equal to in the denominator. So here, x can equal 0. Here, x can equal 3. Here, x cannot equal 4. And here, x cannot equal negative 3. And that right there is our second answer. Let's look at letter B. So looking at letter B, what we're going to do is we're going to factor the top part right here using the GCF. Notice that this is all, those are monomials, so we're going to leave them alone. X to the 5th and 6x squared. The GCF, when we factor it, is a 3 and an x. So what we're left with is an x minus. Now looking at our denominator, what we notice is that that's a special factoring pattern. So we take the square root and we get x minus 5 and x plus 5. Now for the easy part, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be canceling. We see that the x minus 5's cancel. We see that the 3 cancels with the 6 to become a 2. We see that the x squared cancels with the 5, and that becomes a 3. So now what we're going to do is we're going to multiply across. We have the 3, x to the 3rd, and we have an x. So if we add that up, that gives us a 4, x to the 4th. And then in the denominator, there's a 2, and there's an x plus. So that right there gives us our first answer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find our excluded values. Our excluded values are what give us 0 in the denominator. So right here, what gives us 0 is a 0. Whenever it's a monomial, it's always 0. Right here, it's a positive 5. And right here, it's a negative 5. And that right there would be our second answer. Now, looking at letter C, what we notice with letter C is that there are trinomials. So that means we're going to be using the x quite a bit. So if we're looking at these, we see that all of them are divisible by 3. So if we factor out a 3, we have x squared minus x minus 6. And then when we use the x method, what we have is negative 6 and negative 1. So it'd be negative 3 and 2. So we have 3, x minus 3, x plus 2. Now, if we're looking at the bottom part, we're looking for two numbers that multiply together, give us negative 3, add up to positive 2. That would be 3 and negative 1. So we write x plus 3 and x minus 1. Now we're going to look at our next fraction. When we're looking at our next fraction, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the 3 and the 1. And that right there gives us a 3, adds up to 4. So that would be 3 and 1. Because there's a 3 right there, we're going to divide each of them by 3. And so what that gives us is x plus 1 and 3x plus 1. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at our denominator. We're going to do the same thing, 3 and negative 2. That gives us a negative 6. So we have a negative 6 on top. We have a negative 5 on the bottom. So that would be negative 6 and 1. Because there's a 3 right here, we're dividing each of them by 3. When we divide it by 3, what we get is x minus 2. And we have 3x plus 1. Now for the easy part. What we're going to do next is we are going to cancel. So when we cancel, we see that we have an x plus 1 right here. Sorry, 3x plus 1. And when we're looking around, we notice that nothing else cancels. This is a negative. This is a positive. This is a positive. This is a negative. And this is a negative. That's a positive. So what we're going to do is we're going to write our answer. 3x minus 3, x plus 2, x plus 1, x plus 3, x minus 1, and x minus 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to state our excluded values. When we're finding our excluded values, it's what x cannot equal. We're looking at our original problem. So here, it's a negative 3. Here, it's a positive 1. Here, it's a positive 2. Here, it's a negative 1/3.